Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about remote work. And specifically, this is an answer to a question from R3M1 who asks, Hey, Tim, what's your take on remote staff versus having the team work in an office? Do you have a preference? What are the pros and cons, etc.? Good question. I'm really glad the way you phrase it because, like everything, I think remote work has pros and cons. I don't think there's very little out there that I think is 100% good or 100% bad. And maybe that's my programmer brain thinking because there's no perfect sorting algorithm. It all depends on what you're sorting and how many and how frequently it changes and whether it's already sorted when you go to resort. There's no good data structure. Sometimes you want an array, sometimes you want a singly linked list, sometimes you want a doubly linked list, sometimes you want something else entirely. So, I think remote work has good things and bad things about it. If someone tries to tell you remote work is all good or all bad, they're probably trying to sell you something or trying to sell you on something. Because remote work isn't new. Remote work has existed forever. My second game that I made was done remote. I made Bard's Tale construction set before I was hired at Interplay. I did it all in my house, and I would drive in once a week for maybe an hour, hour and a half to show my progress, to give them a backup of the code, and just to get feedback to see what I should do in the next week. So, my first game, Grandstand Bridge, was done in an office, and my second game was almost entirely remote. So this has been like this forever, and in fact, contractors are almost always remote because if you have them come in and be in there in office hours and use computers, a lot more states are viewing them as employees and not contractors. Anyway, we used remote contractors a lot at Interplay and Troika back in the 90s and the early 2000s. So again, this isn't something new. One thing I can say about it is some people did really great as remote workers. Some, not so much. Now, it turns out some people just need the interaction, and it's them. They want interaction with coworkers. Sometimes they need guidance. Sometimes their work needs editing. So if you wait too long, they're due too much, and the editing requires throwing out some of the stuff they did because they went in the wrong direction. Some people have uneven work. So if you can see their work every day or every week, it lets you keep them on track. So I think that's how remote work has turned out over the last few years. Now that the great experiment has a lot more people doing remote work, some people are great at it, some people aren't. And it's different. Sometimes it's the people. Sometimes it's this person is not good at doing remote work. And maybe it's something to do with them, or it may have to do with their home environment. They may have a home environment that's just not conducive to working there. Maybe they don't have a place to set up a home office that's quiet, that's somewhat set apart. Maybe their environment is too loud. Maybe there's too many people. Maybe it's too cramped. It's just not conducive for whatever reason to doing work there. A lot of people who were really pushing for everyone being remote, in some ways it felt a little entitled because you don't know what people's home lives are like. And some people just don't have a home life that is set up for them being there, working there. Also, you've heard of third spaces. You have work and then home, and then you have a third space. It's neither work nor home. If work and home become the same thing, your third space becomes second space. And if you didn't have a third space, you only have one space. A lot of people can't deal like that. Now, in the last few years, I've talked to a lot of people at different companies. Sometimes it's because I was contracting at different companies. Sometimes I just had friends that worked at different companies. And one time I actually was on a forum talking to people at different companies. And let me give you the bad news up front. Overall, since a lot of places went remote work, productivity is down. Now, before you get all upset, some of you, I didn't do a survey. This is just me talking to people in the normal course of me going about my business in the game industry. But if you don't believe me, you can actually check. I believe there was a drop in games coming out. The number of games that came out in 2023 and 2024, especially from big publishers, dropped. A lot of games had delays, and I think a lot of you think the quality dropped too. So you can attribute this to the shift to remote work required a lot of learning on both people's parts. Sometimes the employee had to learn how to work at home without access to other people, with having to do questions and meetings over videos. And sometimes managers had to learn how to manage people remotely, where you couldn't just walk into their office, where you couldn't have scheduled office meetings, where you couldn't get everybody in one room to do a strike team. There was a lot of learning going on both sides. So that they attributed the productivity drop to that. And it did come back up, but it didn't come back up to 100. It seemed to level off somewhere between 75 and 80%, depending on who you talk to. Some places lower, some places a little higher. I've yet to have a company that wasn't remote before the pandemic say that they're entirely back to 100% after the pandemic. If you work at such a place, leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. I'd also love your ideas on how you made that happen, because it hasn't happened everywhere. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people, when they remote work, think they're really productive because it feels like they're working all the time. But they're not. And I don't mean to imply that they're lazy, although you know what? Probably some of them are. They're just not working a full 8 hours, but they're saying they are. But for most of them, they are working. But when they don't have other people around them, they find it hard to get into that work groove. I did a video about going to university, going to school versus being self-taught. And in that video, and I'll link it below, people talked about, being at a university helped them study. Being around a lot of other people studying helped them study. That's why people went to the library, not just because it was quiet, but there was a whole bunch of other people studying there, and it got them into the mindset. For some people too, they need the structure. They're not good at learning that stuff on their own. They want the structure that classes provide. Like, we're going to learn this quarter, and then we're going to learn this, and then we're going to build on these things. Some people need that at work too. They need to be given a few tasks. They work on it. They get feedback on those tasks, make any changes they need to do, and then that informs the next tasks they do. For some people, working remotely interfered with that rhythm. Now, some people knew that, and they could not wait to come back. Yes, there were people who were waiting for their offices to stop being fully remote because they wanted to work back in the office. And I've heard stories of some of them being made fun of by their peers, or maybe even being pressured and a little bit bullied by their peers, which reminded me of the things I used to work like. I used to hear, like, why are you working more than 40 hours a week? It makes me look bad. And that eventually turned into you're giving away time to the company and you have bad work-life balance. But I've heard of people who wanted to go back into the office and their coworkers were trying to convince them not to because they didn't want to go back. So they didn't want their other coworkers to go back for fear that the company would make everybody come back. And again, I don't know why some people want this. For some of them, they just couldn't work well at home. For others, they like working at home. Maybe it has something to do, if you watch my video on some people have a job, some people have a career, and some people have a calling. I think a lot of the calling people wanted to be back in the office. But then again, some of the calling people worked really well at home. So I don't know what it is. But when I talk about some people could work well at home and because it was isolated and quiet, some roles do better at that too. So it's not just people, sometimes it's the roles. Programmers, and I've talked about this, really like quiet, isolated programming time. They tend to do really well in remote work. But not all roles do well like that. Some roles do better when they can bounce ideas off people, ask people how they did things, look over the shoulder of other people doing things and then go do it themselves. Some art roles do better that way, design roles. And not all people, even in roles that tend to do well, not all programmers, for example, did well working from home. So not all people do well working from home, and not all roles did well working from home, and not everyone, even in roles that tended to do well, did well working from home. Now, let me just say that, first of all, I don't think that genie of remote work is going back in the bottle. Remote work is here to stay. Personally, I like it. It works well for me. I'm really good at managing my time. I'm really good at being task-oriented. If I get up at 5 in the morning and I'm wide awake, I like just getting started at work. I don't like having to wait 2 or 3 hours because they don't want me too far out of the core hours at the office. But And also, I think companies are getting way better, and by companies I mean managers and leads, are getting way better at managing remote workers. They're just learning how to run teams, how to go over tasks, how programmers can do not pair programming, but maybe code review better, even when they're not sitting side by side. But like everything with multiple sides, with pros and cons, some people just aren't good at remote work, and other people need to get better at doing remote work if this is something they want to do long term. What I see happening now at various companies is people are getting reviewed on their work and decisions are being made because sometimes the remote work just didn't make sense for this person. So I see that happening, and I see some people reluctantly being asked to come back into work. I don't know what's going to happen long term. I think, like I said, remote work is here to stay, but I don't think it's here to stay for everybody, and I don't think it's here to stay in every role. I don't think this is any different than some people do work better in different shifts. Some people do work better at night shifts or early morning shifts. Some people like to mix roles. I loved being a designer and a programmer on the same project. That works for some people, doesn't work for others. Remote work is no different. I think it's here to stay, but it's not going to be here to stay for everybody, and certainly not everybody in every role. And R3M1, I hope that answers your question.